The story begins at dawn in the busy terminal of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The atmosphere is charged with the hum of conversations, the occasional blare of flight announcements, and the rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases on tiled floors. The camera pans to a corner of the check-in area, where a lone figure stands. A man in his late 60s wearing a faded military jacket and holding a weathered leather duffel bag. His posture is slightly stooped, his silver hair neatly combed, and his eyes, a mix of steel and softness, scan the bustling crowd with a quiet patience. This man, James Porter, is a Vietnam veteran traveling to a reunion of his platoon, a gathering he hasn't attended in over 20 years. Life, responsibilities, and self-doubt had kept him away, but this year feels different. Yet, standing in line at the American Airlines check-in desk, James feels out of place amidst the sea of hurried travelers. He tugs at his jacket, as if the insignia on his chest might be too conspicuous or not noticed at all. For James, this journey wasn't just about miles but decades of memories, some he cherished, others he had fought to forget. The lines on his face told a story of battles fought long ago, yet today he faced a quieter struggle. Would anyone remember the sacrifices he and his brothers had made? Or had time swept them into the shadows, like so many unsung heroes? This sets the stage for the emotional journey ahead, capturing the audience's empathy and curiosity. As James inches closer to the check-in counter, the surrounding chatter feels distant, drowned by the rhythm of his thoughts. He clutches his old duffel bag tighter, the worn leather a comforting reminder of days when he was sure of his purpose. James's internal monologue wrestles with a mix of anticipation and self-doubt. Would they recognize me? Remember me? Would it feel like the old days? Or would it be a room full of strangers with nothing left to say? The people in line seem unaware of his quiet turmoil. A young man in business attire scrolls through his phone, while a family behind him argues over boarding passes. James's gaze briefly settles on a teenage boy nearby, wearing headphones and a hoodie, and he wonders if the boy has ever heard the stories of men like him. The check-in agent, Claire, is a bright-eyed woman in her early 30s. Her cheerful demeanor seems routine, but there's an attentiveness to her as James approaches. "Good morning, sir," she says warmly, noticing his military jacket. "Are you traveling for business or pleasure?" James hesitates, unsure how to categorize a trip back to a past he spent years avoiding. "Something in between," he replies with a faint smile. Their exchange is polite but brief. Claire, noting the insignia on his jacket, quietly makes a mental note as James walks away. She leans toward her colleague, whispering something as her eyes follow him. As James moves toward security, he hears snippets of hushed voices behind him. Glances are cast his way, subtle but unmistakable. For a moment, he feels the same vulnerability he experienced decades ago when he returned home from war to a nation divided. The audience is drawn into his internal conflict. His struggle with invisibility versus the desire to be seen and remembered. James didn't realize it yet, but sometimes recognition comes from the places you least expect. And while he may have doubted his significance in this moment, a quiet ripple of change had already begun to spread through the airport, sparked by something as simple as a glance at his jacket. James makes his way through the TSA checkpoint, the mundanity of removing his shoes and emptying his pockets offering a brief distraction. The agent inspecting his ID glances at his jacket, then at him, offering a small, respectful nod. It's subtle but sincere. James acknowledges it with a quiet thank you, though he can't help but wonder if it was meant for him or simply the uniform. As he steps into the terminal, he takes a moment to gather himself, his duffel bag heavy against his shoulder. Around him, families reunite with hugs, travelers hurry past, and announcements echo overhead. But James feels apart from it all, caught between the weight of his memories and the uncertainty of what awaits. James settles into a corner near his gate, keeping to himself. He pulls out an old photo from his bag, a snapshot of his platoon, young and full of life. His thumb brushes over the faces of friends long gone, the edges worn soft from years of handling. The image stirs a flood of emotions: pride, grief, and a lingering sense of guilt for surviving when so many didn't. As he sits lost in thought, a young flight attendant, Megan, approaches. She hesitates for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me, sir. I couldn't help but notice your jacket. Were you in the military?" James nods, his voice steady but modest. "Vietnam. A long time ago." Her eyes light up with admiration. "Thank you for your service. My grandfather served too. He always spoke about the sacrifices you all made." Her words catch James off guard. He manages a faint smile and mutters, "Thank you," but the exchange leaves him unsettled. As boarding begins, James stands and joins the line, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He notices the whispers again, a few passengers stealing glances in his direction. He overhears a child asking his father, "What's that jacket mean?" The father explains softly, and James's heart tightens at the realization that his presence is drawing quiet attention. Just as he reaches the gate, the young flight attendant reappears, speaking quietly to a man in a captain's uniform. The captain, Michael, approaches James with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Mr. Porter, it's an honor to have you on our flight today. I understand you're a Vietnam veteran?" James nods, his voice low. "That's right." The captain's voice carries a gravity that draws the attention of nearby passengers. "Well, sir, on behalf of myself and my crew, I want to thank you for your service. We wouldn't be here without men like you." James hadn't expected this. Eyes on him, voices thanking him. For years, he'd told himself his service was forgotten, his sacrifices unnoticed. But here, in the midst of an ordinary flight, a small spark of recognition began to flicker, hinting at something far greater to come. The plane is mid-flight, cruising smoothly above the clouds. James sits by the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of blue and white, his thoughts still tethered to the past. The hum of the engines and quiet conversations fill the cabin. Suddenly, a voice crackles over the intercom. It's the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment to recognize a very special passenger on board today. Mr. James Porter, seated in 17A, is a Vietnam veteran who served our country with honor and distinction. Mr. Porter, on behalf of the crew and everyone here, we thank you for your service." The cabin falls silent for a moment, then erupts into applause. James freezes, his face a mixture of shock and humility. Passengers turn to look at him, some clapping, others nodding respectfully. The flight attendants walk down the aisle toward James, carrying a folded American flag and a small note. Megan, the young attendant from earlier, kneels beside him, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "This is from all of us, sir. A small token of our gratitude." James's hands tremble as he accepts the flag, his throat tight. For years, he had carried the burden of feeling forgotten. In this moment, he realizes he wasn't invisible after all. His service mattered, not just to those he fought alongside but to generations who came after. As James looked at the faces around him, the applause washing over him like a tide, he felt something he hadn't in decades: pride. Not just in what he'd done, but in knowing it would never be forgotten. As the plane descends toward its destination, the cabin settles into a calm hum. James sits quietly, the folded flag resting on his lap. His expression is a blend of awe and gratitude, the earlier applause still resonating in his ears. He glances out the window, the city lights below shimmering like scattered stars. When the plane lands, passengers begin gathering their belongings, many pausing to shake James's hand or offer heartfelt words. An elderly woman places a hand on his shoulder and says, "Thank you for all you gave us." A young boy salutes him awkwardly but earnestly, and James smiles for the first time in what feels like years. As James steps off the plane, he's greeted by Megan and Captain Michael one last time. Megan hands him the note that came with the flag. "I hope this means as much to you as you've meant to us, sir," she says. Outside the terminal, James finally unfolds the note. It reads, "For your sacrifices, your courage, and your service, our deepest thanks. You've inspired us all." James stands for a moment, the noise of the bustling airport fading away. For the first time in decades, he feels truly seen. James walked into the airport that morning as a quiet man, burdened by the weight of his past. He left it not as a forgotten veteran, but as a symbol of resilience and gratitude, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can illuminate the darkest corners of a life.